Okay, so we have a sense now of what dissonance is. It's this usually psychological, but sometimes even a physiological discomfort that comes from having inconsistent attitudes or thoughts or even behaviors. And it can be things that are inconsistent with our positive self views in general. But I want to give us a little bit of historical context for when dissonance theory came onto the scene and how it really impacted things in psychology as a whole. So before Festinger brought about dissonance theory with many collaborators and other people contributing to it, of course. Um, there was a general sense in psychology that the things going on inside of our brains were either not important or we could not observe them, so we shouldn't really think about them. So you might remember from earlier in this class or in your intro psych course that the early part of the last century was really dominated by one perspective in psychology. And that perspective was behaviorism. People like Watson and Skinner, and these ideas basically that the behaviors that we engage in as human beings are shaped really almost entirely by rewards and punishments. You get good things for doing good behaviors, you get bad outcomes for doing bad behaviors, right? And that's how we learn about the world. And there is a lot of truth to that. Punishments do to some extent tend to reduce behaviors. Rewards tend to be more effective in shaping the behaviors that we want than punishments do. But it's a very simple and straightforward way of looking at behavior and human behavior in general. So behaviorists, though, they basically said that the only things we can observe as scientists are what goes in and what goes out, like reinforcements and punishments and stimuli and the behaviors that result from them. Anything that was going on inside of a person's head to behaviorists is something that's unobservable that we don't need to worry about because we can't measure it or think about it in a scientific or objective way. Festinger and many, many other people had spent, years, if not decades, kind of going against behaviorism and looking for ways to explain how we do need to look inside people's heads. We do need to think about thinking and cognition and construal and interpretation. And all these things should sound, familiar from a lot of the things we talked about in the first sections of the course, that people's construals matter. People's perceptions and how they think about situations matter a lot. And dissonance, in large part, played a big role in making that change. The landmark study that really put dissonance ideas on the map in a lot of ways was something that Festinger did with some co-authors and graduate students. They wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails. And this was inspired by a newspaper article that they had read about someone who claimed that they were receiving messages from aliens via something called automatic writing, which is basically like someone, I'm just going to come out and say it, pretending to be like possessed or receiving messages, just, doing some kind of hokey thing where they're going, oh, I'm getting a message. And they would, write down whatever they wanted to convince people of. So there was this article about a woman in Chicago named Dorothy Martin who was, getting kind of a following of people who believed that she had something important to say because she was receiving messages supposedly from aliens. In the book, they, kind of tried to protect her identity and called her Mrs. Keach, Marion Keach, and said it was in Michigan, but it was really about this woman in Chicago. But what Festinger and his colleagues did was they saw a chance to really show that our interpretations of things matter. And it's not just about rewards and punishments. There might be other things that predict our behavior in a more nuanced and accurate way, just than our reinforcement histories of punishments and rewards. So Mrs. Keach, again, she was claiming to get messages from aliens from some planet called Clarion that she claimed existed. And the key message that she was getting was that the world was going to end. There was going to be some sort of, not clear if it was like a literal or metaphorical flood, but there was supposed to be some catastrophic event that was going to end the world on December 21st, 1954. But Luckily, the way Mrs. Keach told it was that the aliens had said, "This is going to happen, but we're going to save you. We're going to save you and all the people that believe in our, alien superpowers, and we will pick you up at the very beginning of December 21st, so you're saved from the flood." And a lot of people started to believe Mrs. Keach, and this is kind of the an early stage in a cult, basically, that she had gotten people to believe that she had these answers to some unanswerable questions, and she could save them from certain doom. So people, they, alienated their families. They left their families. They quit school. They left their jobs in order to become, like supplicants at Mrs. Keach's feet, basically. And they had to give away their money and their possessions and just kind of live a sort of unencumbered life with each other as they waited for these aliens to show their devotion to the cause. And she also had some other kind of smaller things that showed people's devotion. Like, for some reason, metal ruined the way the aliens' spaceships worked, apparently. So everyone had to have no metal on their person, so they could, get in the spaceship and be saved. So I don't know. You can picture these people without any zippers or anything. Maybe they're all wearing sweatpants in Mrs. Keach's living room. Who knows? But they are following these things to the letter. They're big and small. They're taking these sorts of cues from her and believing that it is how the world works. They also were kind of, ostracized publicly because they were engaging in this kind of wild behavior. And they, didn't really talk to people. They didn't give interviews. They, people wanted to talk to them because it was some odd behavior, but they only let people that were really in the group into Mrs. Keach's house. So Fessinger and his colleagues engaged in something called a participant observation study. He and some other people convinced this group of true believers that they too were true believers. So they kind of infiltrated the group. They pretended they were involved in it. And there are, of course, some ethical considerations when you're infiltrating a group like that. Hard to say if an IRB at a university would approve a study like this now, but at the time, they were able to, show the group that they believed, and they were able to kind of watch their behaviors without, the people feeling like they were being criticized or something. But anyway, they've joined this group. They convinced the people that they were, true believers. And on the night of December 20th, they arrived and assembled at the house. And midnight rolls around. The aliens are supposed to be here at midnight. They're not here. What's going on? Oh, well, one of the clocks is slow. So let's go by this different clock. They're probably on their way. They just have a different clock than we do. Some more time passes. No aliens. They wait around for hours. The group is collectively crushed by this outcome that they were seemingly wrong. The aliens weren't coming to save them from the catastrophic flood. Mrs. Keach is in tears, and the group is just kind of stunned that it's going to work out for them. But what's that? Mrs. Keach receiving another message. She receives another automatic writing or psychographic message. She writes it down, and the message says, "This little group sitting all night long has spread so much light that God, or the aliens, she sometimes called the aliens God, that God saved the world from destruction." So instead of them needing to be saved, their faith is what saved the world from this catastrophic flood. After that, the group was approached by newspapers to interview them about this awful outcome for them, and the group accepted, and they started talking about how wonderful their group was and how their faith saved the world, trying to spread their alien gospel to lots and lots of people. So behaviorists, this idea that the only things that matter are the rewards and punishments that come out of our experiences, behaviorists would have predicted that these people that get this catastrophic news that their belief system is all completely wrong, that there aren't aliens coming to save them, the world's not going to end, that's a punishment in a lot of ways that should lead to them changing their behavior, leaving the group, throwing away its teachings. Behaviorists would have said the exact opposite thing that actually happened should have happened. So they should feel this disgrace. They've given up their property. They've left their families, and they should, go crawling back, basically, is what behaviorists would predict. But that really is not what happened at all. The group, by and large, they doubled down on their beliefs. They decided that it was this incredibly important crusade that they were on, and they, further embraced what was going on. So Festinger, a couple years later, wrote this up in a book-length treatment called A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. There were lots of other studies and observations involved, but it drew heavily on these ideas from When Prophecy Fails as well. But it really showed the world, the scientific world at least, that it's not just behavior. The construals that we have, the cognitive elements that we might feel like we can't really directly observe, those things matter. The thoughts that we have and how we think about the world matters. They matter for what we know about ourselves, what we know about other people. Attitudes and beliefs can influence one another, and it's not just what we do that matters. The way that we think about things matters a whole lot. But not only that, we don't like inconsistency between these elements. We like these things, again, to be consonant rather than dissonant. And if we experience these inconsistencies, then we have this feeling of dissonance, this unpleasant psychological or physiological arousal or tension. And when we have a feeling we don't like, we're generally motivated to reduce those feelings. So we want to reduce that tension. So to wrap up this video, I want to talk just about how different attitude elements and behaviors might be related to one another. So dissonance theory makes room for the idea that elements might have nothing to do with one another. Like you say, riding the bus is cheaper than driving. I hope I get an A on exam too. Well, those things don't have anything to do with each other, so there's not going to be any dissonance there. Cognitive elements can be relevant to one another and consistent, like riding the bus is cheaper than driving and riding the bus saves gas. Okay, those things fit together, both positive things about riding the bus, no dissonance. Elements can logically flow from one another and be consistent, like riding the bus is cheaper than driving, so I rode the bus to class today. Great. That you had some attitude that told you something about the bus, and it led you to engage in this behavior that's consistent with it. So no dissonance there if you're still consistent. However, elements can, of course, be relevant to one another and inconsistent, like riding the bus is cheaper than driving. I drove to class today. Those elements have this tension between them. They are dissonant. So they have an unpleasant arousal that comes with them. And this is when you would experience this feeling of dissonance. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about some specific types of cognitive dissonance and the way that people reduce that dissonance in kind of predictable ways.